Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Today, we continue with the fourth season of the Match Guide, where we'll be looking beyond the ropes of Tony Khan's ring to the matches, wrestlers, promotions, and movements that influenced All Elite Wrestling. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe or rate it on your podcast app of choice. Support the Social Suplex Podcast Network financially through Red Circle. And make sure you check out all of our other great shows where we cover all of the aspects of the world of pro wrestling. We've got One Nation Radio, Keeping It Strong Style, All Things Elite, Tunnel Talk, the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast, Wrestle Art with Chris Things, Imp's AEW Adventure, and Joshing Around. And you can subscribe to the Social Suplex newsletter at socialsuplex.com/newsletter. Become part of our community by joining our Discord, where you can chat with the hosts of all our podcasts, as well as other wrestling fans from around the world. Links for all of these things are in the podcast description. My guest for today is the editor-in-chief for Pro Wrestling Musings, Sergi Alderman, and we're discussing Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard, I Quit Steel Cage match for the NWA United States Championship at Starrcade 1985. Welcome to the show, Sergi.
Good morning, Sam.
Great to have you back on. We've been to all sorts of places. We've been to a random gym in Japan during quarantine. We've been to Dynamite, and now we are going back in our time machine to 1985.
Yep, to the Coliseum there.
Greensboro Coliseum, North Carolina. Where
I was about to say Richmond. No, that's not right. Yeah, the Greensboro Coliseum, one of the most significant places in wrestling history. Many amazing matches have happened there.
Yep.
And this is one of the most historic is maybe not the word, but the
infamous.
Most fondly remembered or viscerally remembered ones.
Yeah, I'd say viscerally remembered is probably more like what it is. I'd say almost a sordid reputation, Greensboro, North Carolina. Of course, that's where Sting retired back in 2024 when AEW visited the hallowed grounds. This is by far, in a way, the oldest match we've covered in the show. You know, we've done matches from the 2000s. We haven't even done matches from the 90s yet. We're going to this season, but we haven't been there yet. And we're going all the way back to 1985, totally a different time. Sergi, what made you choose this match when I said you can pick any match from the history of wrestling that's influenced AEW somewhat?
Well, the reason is that one of the feud that has had the most impact on me and that I, as a writer, have had the most engagement with in AEW is the feud between Hangman and Swerve. And when I thought, okay, what's a match from history that I can look at and then link back to what I've written and am going to continue to write about the Hangman Swerve feud, because there's a series of analysis that I've written about that feud and about the different blood symbolism and literary symbolism in the feud that I'm going to continue on with, and then, you know, like I can pitch it here, like, hey, come read this. Plan to have that come out at the same time. And the match that I think was the biggest influence on them and that they made callbacks to and references to was this match. And it's also a match that long before AEW existed, that even though it was, I wouldn't say before my time, I watched some wrestling as a little kid before this, but it wasn't something that I engaged with personally. I wasn't watching the right stations at the right time to have watched this at the time when I was a little kid. But long before AEW existed, when I first started getting back into wrestling in the early 21st century, one of the first things on the internet, like, hey, you should try this match, go back and watch this match, and video sharing services. One that definitely made an impact on me as, wow, this is amazing. How they, the brutality of this, and not just the brutality, but the feeling of, I feel that these people are really trying to harm each other. I feel you can feel their hatred in what they're doing, and it's just an amazing for that. And I think had a big influence on what Hangman and Swerve were trying to do later on in AEW. So that was the link, and that was the thing that made me say that, yeah, that's the match I would want to cover.
Yep. So what you're saying is I also really want to cover Hangman vs. Swerve in a cage, but because you're not doing AEW matches this season, Sam, we'll do the next best thing. And I'll trick you into talking about it, but I very much am looking forward to speaking about that. There is lots of parallels that we can draw, similarly to you. This is a match that is sort of revered. It's famous. It's really well known. I think the way that I got linked to this was I asked someone who I knew. Actually, a guy who's been on this podcast a number of times, Miz Fan, when I was sort of looking to look back at wrestling and look at the history of wrestling, and I said, what are some of the most violent matches you've ever seen? And from the territory days, he picked the dog collar match between Greg the Hammer Valentine and Roddy Piper, and this match as things that I should check out as like, what's the most violent matches you've ever seen? So, it's one that's very well known within hardcore circles. So, I'm looking.
And that other one is a great example of a different match in AEW that clearly made references to it. And of course, 100%. That being Punk versus MJF. Yeah.
Well, and also when they had the Cody versus Brody one, they literally had Greg Valentine sitting in the crowd. So they were very clearly doing that too. But yeah, look, there's also some other things we'll be talking about. So we're talking about the build to this match, of course, talking about the match itself, talking about the cage match in general, because it's, I think, something that AEW has very specifically done has been its usage of cage match as almost as a reaction, as so much of AEW is, as a reaction to how the industry leader, WWE, treated the cage match for many years there. But another interesting thing that I just thought was interesting to think about is this is, of course, happening, a match that happened in Jim Crockett Promotions. So the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, also known as JCP, Jim Crockett Promotions Wrestling. And Jim Crockett Promotions is a man that Tony Khan has compared himself to a number of times when he's talked about himself as a wrestling promoter. There's, a very famous moment when WWE was starting to counter-program against AEW, and he banged the table and he said he was fed up with this shit and let's fucking go. But he's got a lot more fucking money than Jim Crockett in comparing himself to Jim Crockett. So I thought that was an interesting comparison to make straight up there, how Tony sort of sees in some ways that AEW is like a natural successor and progression of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling.
True, absolutely.
And I mean, it's not dissimilar in location it's from, because it was most prominent, around Georgia, Carolinas, around the South, and AEW, of course, based out of Jacksonville, which is not too far from Atlanta. Well, I say not too far, it's a number of hours drive. It's not exactly
from Australia's point of view,
but it's in that
it's sort of nearly as far
in that
as
regional area, sort of the southeast of the southeast of America.
No, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. Florida had its own very prominent territory, and it also should be pointed out that AEW kind of has two centers, the Jacksonville, but also to some extent Chicago.
Very true. Very true. Well, I just thought that was a nice little way to dip our toe in, thinking of Tony Khan, Jim Crockett, and the links between those guys. Of course, Jim Crockett also on TNT and TBS, which is just another link there that you've got between the two. I know there's scholars of the territories who are currently typing out 1,000 more linkages between the promotions that I haven't mentioned. But let's get into talking about the build to the match itself. Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard. This is exactly the kind of logical booking stipulation build up that you would hear, people talking about of back in the day. This is how cage matches were. This feud originally starts in July 1985. Of course, Starrcade happens in November 1985. It starts out when Tully's coming off a program with Dusty Rhodes for the NWA television title. That actually climaxes in a steel cage match, a bloody steel cage match where Tully loses to Dusty Rhodes. That's at the Great American Bash in 1985. And there's some sort of interactions around there with Magnum at the time, which then also sees Blanchard set his eyes on Magnum TA's NWA United States title, which he beats him for at a house show. That's a pretty crazy thing that you would not see these days, but it's, the kind of thing that would happen all the time in the territories because it was about drawing the houses on the house shows. That's how they made their money. In that match, Baby Doll would slip him a roll of quarters, which he'd then hold in his hand. He'd ball up in his fist and punch Magnum with those to take the win and win the title in dubious manner. And then for months on end, these two would be at each other's throat. Apparently, and look, I don't know where this person sourced it from, but apparently they had something like 130 matches as they toured around house shows and whatnot in between when this feud started and when this feud ended. So look, that number may be apocryphal. I don't know. I'm sure it was a lot of matches though. But of course, Tully Blanchard, he's just that dastardly Tully Blanchard. He always seems to manage to find a way out, whether it's via disqualification, via cheap shot, or the one just before Magnum demands the match stipulation that he gets. It's a double count out that happens where they're both apparently they'd been wrestling for 50 minutes, Magnum says, before they went to a double count out. And, as things get more personal and violent, as Magnum TA is trying to win back his title, and Baby Doll keeps on getting involved and Tully Blanchard keeps cheating his way out of it, Magnum would demand an I Quit match. He would say that it's the only way that the issues can be settled, that Tully had never got the better of him man to man. And to do that, he would have to write to the NWA president, Bob Geigel. He would have to write a letter demanding the match, and he would be denied by Bob Geigel because Bob Geigel, he's running a sporting organization here. And he says emotions have run too high. This match is going to be too violent. I cannot sanction this match. But unfortunately, as so often has happened, the sanctioning bodies ran into a canny promoter who saw dollar signs. And Jim Crockett, when they put the contract out for this match between Tully Blanchard and Magnum TA for Starrcade, Jim Crockett slipped the I Quit stipulation into the contract. Tully signed it unknowingly, and then, of course, they'd signed a contract. Of course, they had to meet man-to-man inside a cage for an I Quit match because they'd signed a contract. That's just what you have to do. And that's the kind of build, as I said, it's just that whenever you hear people talk about how cage matches should be and how they were back in the day, it's basically this is a template. There's two guys, a good guy and a bad guy. They're at odds with one another for whatever reason, and they can't settle it in a one-to-one match anymore because people keep interfering or emotions are too high or people get disqualified. So they lock them in a cage and say, you've got to sort it out in the cage and only one man can walk out. And I also love all the politics in this with, him having to write to Bob Geigel and then, Jim Crockett slipping it in there because Jim Crockett knows it's not fair. And, he's the promoter and wants to see this happen, wants to see the justice happen. It's great stuff, Sergi.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what's really interesting there is that, well, I mean, there's different ways to look at it. Obviously, if you have the perspective of the kid fan that this is aimed at, Bob Geigel is just standing in the way of justice or whatever. But from a different perspective, you'd say, he's standing against brutality and saying, that's a little too much. I can't authorize that because, and it's very similar to the match that we're going to be comparing it to, being lights out, in the sense of not being what's the word, authorized, or
yep.
and Jim Crockett, you were saying, like, he wants to see justice done, but before that you said something I think is a bit more apt. He saw dollar signs. and that's like the big conflict in these kinds of brutal matches of, is this the opportunity for things to finally be settled, or is this just brutality for money? And is this, going beyond the bounds of humanity? And it's very nice to have that voice of reason on commentary that you sometimes get of, hey, maybe we should stop this, and it brings forth the drama.
Yep. I love how in the final promo, for Magnum, this has just escalated so far. It's a matter of pride. He doesn't care. He doesn't mention the championship once in the final in that promo when he's demanding the match. It's a matter of pride to him as a man. This guy has just slipped out of his grasp and has gotten so under his skin that he's just like, I need to make this right. It doesn't matter to him that the titles, well, I'm sure the title's what started it, and that's probably at the back of his mind. But at that point, it's just gone so far that he's like, no, I just need to right this wrong as a man, and demand that respect. And he's just so outraged at first when Bob Geigel denies it. And then, then it's Tully who's just completely outraged when he signed a contract that he didn't think so. And he's going, I'm gonna write to Bob Geigel. I'm gonna write to the Senate, to Congress. I'm gonna write to the president. I demand this. This is outrageous. I shouldn't have to fight someone in an I quit match. That's no way to have a proper sporting contest, because that's definitely what Tully Blanchard wants, is just a straight one-on-one sporting contest. But he's all bluster and Magnum is just resolute in what he wants to do.
Yep. No, absolutely. I think that the way that the buildup works is just so very different as I was comparing the two. And I think that it for me, it's very much like comparing great television of those days, of the 70s and 80s, to today's, so-called golden age of television, where back in the day, it was important to work things so that, the context helps, but you can do without it. Where today that's not considered as important, and it's more is given to the build in terms of if you didn't know the context, you might not really get what's going on here. But I think that a lot of people have seen this match without knowing much about the context, and I know I originally did, and it works without it. It stands on its own, and I think that that's something that that used to be the case more and has pluses and minuses to it.
Yep. Let's move along to the match itself. As you said, it does sort of stand alone. And this was the first time I'd ever dove into the background of what happened. It's obvious from the match that these guys have had some sort of escalation. The announcers make that obvious. But it was good to sort of get some of the context and watch those promos. And I do love the posturing of the old wrestlers, and just how particularly, just how, like, this is going to sound, they're almost one-dimensional in how just straightforward and straight down the line they are. And it's not that they're not believable or anything like that. One-dimensional is probably not the right, because we see one-dimensional as an insult.
Right.
But in terms of, like, you look at Magnum here, it's not complicated what he's doing here and what he's going through. He's just fed up. He's just angry, and he just wants justice. And it's not, there's not too much to read into it. And Tully is just he's just a jerk. He's just a slimy guy who wants to have who wants the gold. He wants the money that comes with the gold. And he's good enough to be just about there. And with a few shortcuts, he can beat someone like Magnum TA. It's pretty straightforward, but they're so straightforward in their delivery and resolute in what they want to do. And Magnum, he's such a man. Like, now he's got the mustache, he's got the mullet, he's tall, he's broad-shouldered, he's handsome. And he knows what he wants, and he knows he's going to get it. And he's going to get, and it doesn't matter if, Bob Geigel stands in his way. He doesn't care. He's going to take it anyway. It's kind of cool it's kind of cool just to go back and see those sorts of characters. And it's different to what it is now. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's just sort of different in the way that wrestling was promoted. And I guess it's probably a reflection of the culture back then as well, and what people wanted to see on TV and wanted from their heroes and that sort of thing.
Definitely more straightforward.
Yep. So this was one part. There was two parts to NWA Starrcade in 1985. This one, of course, was from Greensboro, North Carolina. Just running through the card, you've got some great names. You've got Ron Bass defeats Black Bart. JJ Dillon defeats Ron Bass straight afterwards, and then Buddy Landell defeats Terry Taylor. Like, a lot of these wrestlers, I might have seen one or two matches that they've watched in my entire life, but you just hear those names and you just get an image in your brain of what it is. And of course, this is Greensboro Coliseum in Greensboro, North Carolina, the heart of the South. And the main event, this is second from the top, but the main event's the Rock and Roll Express, of course, also in a steel cage. So they used the steel cage twice in the night. They defeat the Russians, Ivan Koloff and Nikolai Koloff. And you can just imagine, I haven't looked into it, but I can bet that was just pretty much almost the same build. You've got these heels who keep cheating to win. The Rock and Rolls finally get him in the cage and finally manage to get the title and win it in the cage. So I could, without even looking, I would put significant money on that being the case. But you hear those names. The Rock and Roll Express defeat Ivan Koloff and Nikolai Koloff. And if you know anything about wrestling history, you've just immediately got an image in your mind of this is the time, this is the place, this is the tone, this is location. And as I said, second from the top. So we'll get to the match itself. And as we always do here on the AEW Match Guide, we'll give the match its flowers. The Wrestling Observer newsletter, they didn't rate it. At the time, I'm sure Dave Meltzer has spoken about this in the past, though. And cage match, it's currently rated 8.94. So that's the fourth highest cage match rating for Jim Crockett Promotions. And it was also Pro Wrestling Illustrated's match of the year for 1985. So it's a match that was highly thought of when it was first happened, and a match that is still highly thought of to this day, as I said. So in the arena, the cage, it isn't super high. It's sort of just a bit taller than the wrestlers. I sort of like the way that it looks. It's not as professional as a cage you'd see sort of this century, but it looks gritty, but it looks sturdy. It doesn't look like it's something that's going to, be flimsy and bounce around or fall down or something crazy like that. And, you get the classic territory lighting where it's the crowd is dark and there is a spotlight on the ring as they do the intros, which is an aesthetic that I really enjoy to this day, to be honest.
Yep. It's a very different atmosphere. I think it's worth noting that on commentary, we have Tony Schiavone in his very much younger days, along with Bob Caudle. But it's very interesting that the longevity that the man has had.
Yeah, he's a great through line actually, and he's doing a lot of the interviews of guys like Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard in the lead up to this. So you see him on the mic today. He was standing there on the mic, often on TNT or TBS. Even back 30 years ago at this point, which is kind of crazy to think of. That's a man who's a real through line for wrestling, and nearly was lost to wrestling if it wasn't for AEW sort of bringing him back in. Well, it wasn't for sort of, I guess, Conrad Thompson bringing it back via Conrad Thompson, but I think AEW has had has been the better for having Tony Schiavone as part of it.
Absolutely, and I think him being that through line, you see that in this past week when they did the tribute to Ted Turner. That's who they chose for it, was him and Sting. It's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. They knew the man personally.
100%. Yeah, that was very touching, and it was made all the more touching because they don't have the footage. They don't own the footage, but it didn't matter because they had Sting and Tony Schiavone in there, and they've got that personal connection, which was, it meant that it didn't matter that we didn't have the footage. I say we, because I'm part of AEW, Team AEW here, part of the what do they call us now? The Freakazoids still? I don't know. We do have Magnum TA, of course, announced first. Amazing. I just cannot stress highly enough. Amazing mullet. An amazing moustache as well. And then Tully Blanchard is second, drowned in booze. Magnum is just staring so intensely at Tully Blanchard. And as the bell rings, they sort of just circle each other for the first 20 seconds. I love that. And then they lock up, and it's so intense. And then they trade punches. Magnum immediately knocks Tully over and then stalks over to him. And Tully gets back up and immediately circles away. It's so broody, so tense at first. Mm-hmm. And immediately as well, though, as soon as they start trading, you can see Magnum immediately knocks Tully over. And Tully's like, okay, I've got to keep my distance here. Magnum's almost like a tiger sort of prowling and stalking. And Tully's like, okay, I'm going to have to take this one. I'm going to have to be smart about this. I can't just go head first at him.
Yeah, true. He's always looking for cheaper or more efficient ways to get to what he wants to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tully, he gets on the offense. The way he does it is he picks out Magnum's leg. He dives at Magnum's leg, picks it up, and then they're just sort of grappling and trading blows. Magnum, he's clearly got the stronger hands, as I said, and in an interview later on that Baby Doll did, actually, she had recount that when these two laid into each other, you could feel the punches, and she said, and you never know how much they're working, right? She was like, oh, there was a lot of heat at the time, and of course there was a bit of heat afterwards because there's all sorts of personal stuff between these two as things move on, but at the time, she says, at least, that there was so much intensity and heat because there was so much intensity and heat in real life. And so when they were punching each other, you could hear it. You could hear the thuds as they were sort of leaning into each other.
Sure.
Magnum's, he's the first to get thrown into the fence because, of course, it's a steel cage match, as I said. And Tully, then after throwing him into the fence, Tully locks in this super tight camel clutch. But Magnum, he's able to break the hold with his strength. But then Tully throws him into the cage for a second time, and he's comes out dripping in blood. But then he's able to do the same thing to Tully. And that's when we see the introduction of a very important part of this match, which is the microphone. Magnum gets the microphone and he asks Tully if he quits, and Tully just screams, no. And then when Tully gets the microphone, Magnum's just equally defiant. But Tully's response is to just smash Magnum in the face with the microphone. And then they just start rolling around the ring, and they're just clawing at each other, screaming at each other's face. And it lasts a number of minutes, but it feels so intense.
Definitely. Now, I think that when he has them in that camel clutch, it's worth noting that that's an example of them having their different approach. Magnum uses his strength to overcome the camel clutch. He's muscling his way out of it, and as as Tully realizes that he's about to lose control, he goes for the cheap and efficient knee to the kidney to stop that comeback.
And then throws him into the cage as well.
Yep, and that's where the blood starts. That both of them bleeding is a big part of the visual that allows this to be so visceral.
Yeah, I love when they're like just rolling around. They're just like screaming in each other's face. They're just like almost fighting over the microphone as well. Just like say it, and then they're just screaming no, and it's really just so unpretty. Like it's so not designed to be aesthetically pleasing, we see wrestling holds even when they're doing the back and forth chain wrestling, and it's very much most of the time. There's occasions when it's not, but the majority of the time it very much is designed to be like, this is free flowing. You're sort of seeing the athleticism, seeing the flexibility, seeing the move. But in this, they're like, some of the time it just feels like they are rolling around, throwing punches, and zero regard for what it looks like from the outside. Beyond that, they just want it to look like a fight, and it really captures that aesthetic, that just like chaotic, hate-filled aesthetic. And like the crowd is so into it when they're doing this as well. Like even though it's just two people sort of rolling around on the canvas, there's blood everywhere, and they're throwing punches and stuff. You can hear the crowd just rising with it, and the women screaming in particular. It's really obviously so engaging to the audience at the time.
Absolutely. The fan reaction is amazing. And as you say, there's not a lot that you would call a move or a spot. And that's a big difference between this type of violent match then and the more modern ones that definitely include a lot more moves and spots. There's nothing that you would call a spot except possibly a couple times Tully uses the leap from the turnbuckle punch, sort of a spot, and then like the only moves that you really see that you'd call a move would be the camel clutch that you mentioned, and Tully does some elbow drops. But most of it's just punching and going for a dominant position in a wrestling role, basically.
Yeah, it's like I think the closest I had noted down to a spot is I think the closest I had down to a spot is about 10 minutes in. Tully's like in the corner, Magnum mounts it, and he's like raining down punches. There's no one counting, of course, because he just wants to punch the crap out of him. He doesn't care about counting. And now, because I'm like a modern fan, I was like, oh, I see what's about to happen. Tully sort of grabs him as if he's going to powerbomb him, because he's underneath, and Magnum's mounted the turnbuckle, raining down those punches. But I was wrong. Instead, Tully just picks him up and drops him with an atomic drop to the nuts. So even then, it's just like, what's the most efficient way I can hurt this person? I'm not even going to powerbomb him. I'm going to drop his nuts on my knee from the turnbuckle. Like it's literally like there's like 4 or 5 what you call moves. It's like almost inbuilt entirely around the intensity of their hatred and just them being intense with each other, them screaming at each other screaming in each other's faces, screaming in the microphone, and until like the very end.
Yeah. That's what I was about to say, is that the most important part of the match, I think, is they were building to a climax and making that climax work. And the climax begins when the chair is introduced.
Yeah. As you said, like Tully, you mentioned the elbows. Like Tully drops some elbows, and then he throws down the ref. And that sort of is what leads to that climax, as you said. And so Baby Doll from the outside, she lobs a wooden chair over the cage, and you don't even see Baby Doll do that. You just see a thing flying in, and Baby Doll is the one that has thrown it, according to the commentators. And of course that's the case, because she's Tully Blanchard's manager or valet at ringside. So she's on here. He's her meal ticket, so she needs to do that for him. And instead of hitting Magnum, if you guys have never watched this match, I mean, it's 17 minutes. You should probably go and watch it. But instead of hitting Magnum with the thing, Tully just smashes it on the ring because it's a wooden chair. He breaks off a leg, and then he just attempts to stab Magnum in the face with it. And when they're doing this, the work on it is just immaculate. You can like feel the weight of Magnum. He's like putting his whole body behind it, pushing and pushing to try and get it in to stab Magnum in the face. The camera like zooms right in so you can see how close it is. And Magnum's like holding it in front of his face, trying to hold it off. You know, the word like cinematic, people think that cinematic wrestling is something that they came up with in the pandemic. This is like a moment in a movie, what they're doing here. Like the hero is holding a sword away from his face with his bare hands pretty much in this thing is the equivalent of it.
The thing is that they use the word cinematic in a way that basically it's like they're saying fake, and something that's really cinematic is the opposite of that. Like it's a very authentic moment, but it is also cinematic.
Absolutely. I mean cinematic in that, like, this is the kind of thing you'd see in a movie.
Absolutely. No, I meant that the WWE sometimes uses the word. It just sounds like they mean really obviously fake. When you see the way that they use it, it's like, okay, that's not very authentic to our whole premise of we're pretending this is a real sporting event. But a real cinematic moment is one that's like, holy shit, I can imagine seeing this in a fight in a movie, a good movie that doesn't seem really cheesy.
Yeah, and isn't this shot like this is shot incredibly well as well? Like, as in, you know, the camera captures the moment so perfectly and captures the framing of it is so perfectly. So you can see how close it gets to Magnum's face. You can see it, and I'm doing images like right now. So of course, because this podcast being a visual medium, you can see me doing this. But Magnum's holding it in front of his face, and then, you know, inch by inch pushes back. And the crowd, of course, like they're seeing this and they're going absolutely wild as well. And slowly
it looks like you're seeing two people genuinely trying to murder each other at this point. And that's why I think it's important that Tully attacks the ref right then, because you go logically, well, that's not necessary. The ref is what is the ref even doing there? What's the ref going to do about it? But it's when it's like, oh, this is something that a ref who's in charge with no disqualifications, has no reason to call anything, might actually say, hey, what the hell? Stop it, you guys. That's why he, gets him out of the equation right then.
Yeah. The ref might go, like, I'm here to see these two people resolve this, but I'm not here to see a dead body in the ring. Like, I'm not here to see these two people like literally kill each other. But Magnum doesn't care about that because he pushes it back. He hits like a trio of knees to throw Tully off. And then he does not hesitate a second. He grabs another piece of that chair, stands over. Tully is like kneeling in the ring. Magnum stands over him. He stabs him straight in the head. No second thought about it. Stabs him straight in the head. And he just keeps on pushing. And he's just screaming, do you quit? Do you quit? And then eventually Tully yells, yes. And that finishes the match. And the match is over. The bell rings. But even after it's done, Magnum, he still looks absolutely crazed. You could see he's thinking about stabbing Tully again before he just like throws him to the canvas. He gets his hand raised and walks off. He doesn't look happy at all. Man, what this ending is so violent. Like, it's hard to. I'm saying these words, and I don't think it conveys the intensity and the violence and how direct Magnum is when he gets that piece of wood and just shoves it into Tully's head.
Yep. But the thing is that Tully and Magnum, they're playing with the same props, but they're playing a different game because Tully is going for his eye and trying to, like, this guy is, I'm going to have to kill him to stop him. But Magnum has a different perspective. He's got him from behind and is just clawing at his forehead with the same implement. He's not going for his eye or trying to kill him. He's trying to cause him pain because he knows that he will give up, and he can make him give up, and does.
But even just that moment afterwards, like, he's still holding him there, and you can see in his mind, he's like, this guy has gotten so many cheap shots in on me. Do I want to get a cheap shot in on now? And of course he doesn't, because he's the hero of this story. He doesn't, but he thinks about it.
Yeah, for sure.
And like the look in his eyes as well. He isn't even happy having won. Like, he's not celebrating winning this cage match. He gets his arm raised and he walks off. In an interview like later on in his life, Magnum TA described this as a John Wayne moment for his character. He described it as, I let him live. It was not forgiveness or redemption. It was mercy.
Oh, that's good.
I think they conveyed that. At the end, he's just like, I could do more, but I'm not going to. At the end.
And that's another reason why I think it's a really interesting and relevant comparison between the two matches that we were going to talk about. Is that, so many things about the story are similar, but so many are completely different, and that's definitely one of them. But we'll get to that later. You wanted to talk about cage matches in AEW in general first.
Yeah, look, I don't have much more to say about this match. I just think it's like 17 minutes long. The way that the tone that they managed to capture and the atmosphere they managed to capture is so perfect in this. It's so dark, so violent. And it's, there's lots of violent matches that do way more than this, that don't feel half as dangerous and half as dark and half as violent, even though they're doing way more and they're using way worse implements, and, they're using light tubes and they're using thumbtacks and they're using explosions and things like that. There's so many matches that feel that have, more violent acts, but they don't feel as dark. They don't capture the atmosphere that this match does. And I just think that is, this is such a triumph of minimalism for how little these guys physically do in terms of the moves and that sort of thing, but still manage to capture this darkness in the match itself.
And the hatred between the two characters.
Yes.
And the feeling that you've seen a truly climactic moment.
Absolutely.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
Let's talk about, there's a number of things I wanted to talk about, but the first thing I wanted to talk about was the cage match. Because I think when we're looking at AEW, there's lots of different things went into AEW, but one of the things that I think they really wanted to do, and that they've achieved to moderate degrees, is making their stipulation and making their stipulations matter. And by stipulations, I mean stipulation matches. Now, it's a maximalist promotion, so there's often lots of stipulation matches, and I don't think they always get it right in terms of, I do think they sometimes overdo, no disqualification matches and that sort of thing. And part of that, I think, is Tony Khan he's a promoter that very much wants to do a number of things. He wants to let his wrestlers express themselves creatively, and he wants to give his audience value for money. And I think in his quest to do those two things, he lets wrestlers, I'm guessing, I don't have inside information on this or not, but if they pitch, let's do I want to do a no DQ match, or I want to do, this kind of match where I'm using violent means or violent methods, then he's more than willing to say, yep, let's do it. We'll put it on the pay-per-view or make a big deal of it, or, we'll make it a big deal on a Dynamite. It's a match, they're a promotion that it's liberal with its stipulations. However, the cage match itself is one that they haven't used a whole lot. So there's been, not including blood and guts matches, which I think is like sort of a separate thing. There's only been 12 cage matches in the 7 years that AEW has existed. And I think it's worth talking a little bit about, prior to AEW, the cage match, the steel cage, just the plain old steel cage match is a match that had been very much had its teeth taken out of it by the WWE. Even there, they sort of realized that and then introduced the Hell in a Cell match. And even by the 2010s, even that had been changed to a monthly an annual pay-per-view that would come around, and you'd get matches like CM Punk versus Ryback in Hell in a Cell, or there's plenty of other examples. That's just the first one that comes to mind, where it's a match that's not really deserving of that stipulation, but it's this time of the month, so we're going to have a match in a cage. And it was the kind of thing where it wasn't something that people looked forward to anymore. It wasn't something that people looked at as a feud-ending thing, or as a thing that would change people or change careers or change how they are, despite what the WWE would sometimes say on commentary. Do you think that's fair to say, Sergi?
I think that there's definitely, that's fair to say. I think that with AEW, you'd have to make an exception for cage matches in MJF feuds, but other than that, yes.
I'll list out the cage matches that AEW's had. So we've had, the first one was Cody versus Wardlow, Young Bucks versus Lucha Bros, Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa, Shawn Spears versus Wardlow, which is, as I said, that was, when I was thinking about them, that was the one that I didn't remember. Shawn Spears versus Wardlow, Jack Perry versus Luchasaurus, John Moxley versus Kenny Omega, the House of Black versus FTR and Danny Garcia, which was the only one that used the escape the cage rules. Adam Page versus Swerve, Kyle Fletcher versus Will Ospreay, John Moxley versus Samoa Joe, the Death Riders and the Young Bucks versus Darby Allin, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, and Kota Ibushi, and then Adam Page versus Samoa Joe, which is the most recent one. Mm-hmm. For the most part, I think it's fair to say they have done a good job at making these matches all quite impactful. There's only been 4 championship matches, which surprised me how few there'd been, but they're nearly always bloody and nearly always a climax to a feud.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, the exception would be ones in MJF feuds, which are part of his formula that he used to use of testing a person before they were allowed to actually fight him, or wearing them down, in other words. So those should be excluded. But other than those, definitely, especially the one-on-one matches are very much in the spirit of the great cage matches like Tully versus Magnum. I think that Thunder Rosa versus Britt Baker is a really good example of that. Of course, they had already had a lights out match, but the cage match is a perfectly great sequel to it.
Or even, like, for me, it was a match that was sort of derided at the time, but House of Black versus FTR and Danny Garcia, and part of that was because they changed the stipulations around. I thought that was a really fitting ender to that feud as well, particularly the way that it ended up highlighting Garcia and highlighting his growth in taking on the House of Black and being the last man in the cage in that one. By the last man in the cage, I mean, it was him and Malachi Black were the last 2 in the cage, and Garcia won the fall. So I really liked how that ended that feud as well, even though it was a brutal match. Like, FTR and House of Black, say what you want about Malachi Black, but he went really hard in this match, as did Buddy Matthews and Brody King and FTR and Danny Garcia. They, a number of them bled. They hit each other very hard. Cash Wheeler was like ping-ponging pinballing around the cage like a crazy man. Yeah, even that one, which is, probably, if you take away the Sean Spears versus Wardlow, that's probably like the one that was in the least prominent position out of any of them. Even that was quite a good feud ender, I thought.
Well, definitely I see where you're coming from.
But as you very accurately identified, the one that draws the most parallels to this is Hangman versus Swerve. That was an unsanctioned cage match, an unsanctioned lights out cage match that they had. Of course, up until that point, they'd had a number of matches. They had their initial singles match. They had the Texas Death match. They then had another singles match that went to a draw at the start of 2024. Then they had the triple threat match with Samoa Joe. And the last match that they had and that they have had together is this steel cage match. Now, I'll let you take it for a bit, Sergi, for this, because this was one of the main reasons you wanted to talk about this. And there's a lot of different parallels and things that I wanted to talk about. And I thought you can draw between this and the other match. But I think, a good place to start is, there's differences in the build-up, but at the same time, it's a match that comes after a string of increasingly violent matches and a lot of bad blood and a lot of water under the bridge between two guys who do not like each other.
Yeah, absolutely. The feeling of genuine hatred between them is like definitely one of the big parallels between the two. But I think what you were saying before about how clear and distinct the characters were is one of the big differences and contrasts. You were going into this match people were having flat out arguments about who the good guy was.
Well, who do you think the good guy was? That's a good question.
Oh, that's tough, because the thing is, it is that kind of match where, on the one hand, Hangman is just blatantly playing the antagonist in terms of, he burned the man's house down. He thinks he's the good guy, or that he's doing things out of righteous revenge, but everyone is like, that he's going too far and he's out of control. But on the flip side, Swerve, although he is technically the babyface just in the sense of he has the crowd is behind him. The crowd has been behind him for quite a while. A big part of the Hangman Swerve thing is that they sort of do a double turn, but they leave it pretty ambiguous. And one of the things that makes it ambiguous is it's like, well, on the one hand, yes, absolutely, Hangman went too far, and it's a very understandable situation that you feel a lot of righteous indignation. But when you hear Nana shouting, this is what happens when you mess with someone's family, gosh, he sounds like a hypocrite.
I mean,
considering what started out everything.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's interesting because the line that always stands out to me when I think of this particular arc in Hangman's story is he does this incredible promo when he comes back, and he's in the hallway and he's so full of anger. But then the thing that breaks him is he says, they chose him. And that's the thing that breaks his heart, because the audience at this point has chosen to be behind Swerve and chosen to cheer for him as the AEW champion, and chosen him and elected him as, I want this person to be AEW champion, and then cheered when he became champion. And the heartbreak is that for Hangman, the crowd choosing him and being behind him when he was on his ride to the championship was so important to him. And now he feels deserted by that same crowd. And he feels completely justified in his actions, and he doesn't understand why the crowd isn't still behind him. And if anything, that infuriates him only even more. And he, of course, is not doing the right thing. Like he interrupts the match between Swerve and Danielson at All In and he is part of the reason that Swerve loses that title to Danielson. Obviously, Danielson being the better wrestler on the night and having the power of his family and everything behind him is another reason. Part of that match is Hangman interrupting and helping Danielson get back on the forefront when Swerve is looking pretty much unbeatable.
Right.
And so there's that raw, like it's hard to justify, it's hard to agree with what Hangman did. And then of course you get, the burning of his house and that just iconic segment of Dynamite where they're going for the contract signing for this match, and Hangman's not there because Hangman's at Swerve's house to burn it to the ground. As he said that he would do in that promo that I mentioned where he's standing in the hallway, he said he would burn everything to the ground for Swerve Strickland. So it's hard to be on Hangman's side, but he is just like somewhat justified in his actions because, as he said, like this person invaded his house. He endangered, in Hangman's mind, he endangered his child. And then he saw that he was stalking them afterwards as well when Hangman had another child. So Hangman wants to protect his family. And as a result, he's developed this hatred that's, grown into something that is making him do things that a good man never should.
True. But I think that it's important to recognize that when Swerve does that promo where he talks about seeing Hangman's child and a new baby and seeing his family, that his point that he was trying to make, which Hangman kind of misses at the time, is that he was finding them to continue, messing with them and continue doing things, and had second thoughts and said, hey, you know what? He seems to be, why don't I just let him be? Let him, maybe we should be done with this. And didn't continue. Hangman just only focuses on, oh, you were there watching me. It's like, dude, I was considering, going and screwing with you again like I did before, and I decided that was not the way to go. It's really just, and that's the thing, is it's a shades of gray kind of thing, and that's so hard to get right because it's very easy to have everybody be unsympathetic in a way that makes the whole thing just not very vital or very interesting to watch. And I think they do a great job of making sure that everybody is to some extent sympathetic, but you're questionable. There's like, well, on the other hand, to everything that everyone's doing. And it makes it very realistic and believable in the sense of, everybody has agendas, and it's not all good guys versus bad guys in the real world. And but they still make it fun. Well, sometimes it's a little too close to home, but it also is very exciting and watchable.
I would say though that this match is not fun. The cage match is one of the most uncomfortable matches I've ever seen, in a good way. Because I think one of the things that they do get, which is a really good comparison to the I Quit match that we just spoke about, the Blanchard Magnum match. And it's not just that both Hangman and Magnum have fantastic moustaches and great mullets. It's the super brooding, particularly at the start, slow pace that they have. It's an interesting contrast as well to the Hangman and Swerve Texas Death match, where like Hangman charges Swerve before his music even hits, and they take off and run that match like it's a sprint. Like they're immediately they're running at 100 miles an hour in that match. And then the cage match, by contrast, is super slow. Hangman walks the ring so slowly with the fire from Swerve's house playing in the background, because he knows that he's got Swerve in a cage and he's got all night long with Swerve in a cage, which is a really scary, it's a scary thought, because at this point Hangman is completely unhinged in what he's willing to do. And you get that slow pace, which just, I feel like, ramps up the intensity at such a high, to such a high level in that match, to the point where, as I said, like, I feel like it is one of the darkest, most uncomfortable matches I've seen alongside this I Quit match. And in this one, they do a lot to each other. You know, like I said, the other one is a triumph of minimalism. This is not a triumph of minimalism, but it still gets that tone in a way that, like, none of those other cage matches I listed do. You know, there's Young Bucks versus Lucha Bros is very bloody and violent, but also quite exciting and doesn't have that, like, uncomfortable feeling to it or anything like that. Same with Britt Baker versus Thunder Rosa. You know, none of the other ones touch the intensity of this one. And it's an intensity that reminds me a lot of this I Quit match.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that they do a very good job. That was what I was saying before about the comparison of golden age of television. A lot of it is in understanding the build and having seen what led to it. That wasn't quite as necessary before in the I Quit match with Tully and Magnum. It's very much you could just see, like, okay, they hate each other. Moving on. In this match, it's very important that people understand why they hate each other and why they are and are not completely justified, the ways in which they are and aren't. But, you know, one of the biggest parallels that you just touched on, gosh, Hangman looks a lot like Magnum.
So true. So true. Who's more handsome? Who do you think?
That's probably not something I can speak. But they're both very handsome men, and that's one of the big parts of their appeal. It's true. And a big part of I think why a lot of fans had a very difficult time with me saying, like, no, he's the bad guy now. He's trying to be the bad guy. Why won't you let him?
He was lost.
Like you said, he also gives that with the new music, that when the music changes and the slow walk, as opposed to, you know, running out there because he's so angry, the slow walk just makes him very much like the villain of a horror movie.
Yeah, and this match plays out like a horror show, and as does that I Quit match. You know, like the dark tone, the slow pace, the violence as it ramps up, and the Steel Cage match, even though, the Hangman Swerve match, even though there's, you know, cinder blocks and chairs and all that sort of stuff, it really does ramp up to a really violent climax, which is something that is beyond the pale for a lot of people, where Hangman has Swerve in that exact same position that Magnum has Tully in, with him standing over him, holding his head, and this time Hangman's got a hypodermic needle rather than a piece of wood, a chair leg, a splintered chair leg. Got a hypodermic needle and just shoves it through Swerve's face, and then gets the chair and just cracks him over the head with it. I mean, that had to have been a gimmick chair for sure, because Swerve would have, his head would be flat with the way that Hangman brought that down. But the way that, once again, you know, I mentioned, like, the framing and the camera work and how that elevated the ending of the I Quit match. It also elevates the ending of the Hangman Swerve one with that, the way they cut as the impact happens, and it just looks like Hangman has completely brained this guy after shoving this hypodermic needle through his mouth. And, you know, at that point, the match is just over, and he pins him, and it's finished. I cannot imagine in my mind that they haven't thought about the I Quit match and the positioning of Magnum over Tully when they're thinking about what this is going to look like when they do the positioning of Hangman stabbing Swerve through the mouth.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a clear callback, and not the first one. They also do the callback to going after the eye with a chunk of wood. And this time, the chunk of wood has more emotional significance. And this is a case of the backstory being more important in the case of this match, of it being a chunk of wood from the burned house. Intense
stuff. And yeah. I didn't think of that one, actually, to be honest. But that's a very good point out. I also think the last thing I wanted to, I guess, draw the comparison between is the ending. In this one, I mean, I'll say the bad guy wins in this one because Hangman has obviously lost himself. You know, you can argue maybe he's a good guy that's lost himself in the moment, and that's kind of where I think it is. He's like sort of funk that he's in, I guess, or he's like being lost in himself and lost in his mind and lost in the hatred and revenge and the cloud of everything that creates. You know, it stays with him until he ends up going too far with Christopher Daniels. But, you know, in the moment with this, you'd have to say the bad guy wins rather than the good guy, which, you know, Magnum's the good guy in the Magnum Tully match. But the ending where you're like not sure if the other person's done with the other one, you get that incredible image of Hangman on the ramp having just won and Swerve sort of starting to stir in the ring, and you get this look in Hangman's eye where he sort of turns and it's uncertain what's going to happen. And there's this brilliant like squeal where this person is just like, I cannot take this anymore, and just squeals in a way you never hear in wrestling anymore. Yeah. And then Hangman turns away and goes there and goes to the back. He chooses to not go again and not attack Swerve again. Talk to me about that, Sergi. I'm sure you've been busting to talk about this one.
Oh my gosh. That is one of my favorite moments in the match, even though it's technically after the match. Thank you for reminding me. I'd kind of forgotten. And the reason it's one of my favorite moments, I kind of interpret a little differently than most people do. The normal interpretation and the one that the young person in the audience squeals is, oh my gosh, he's thinking about going back and attacking him some more. And I think that this is one of the most key moments for Hangman's character when he realizes what he's become, because he's turned back thinking, my God, maybe I've gone too far. Maybe I should check on him. That's what I think his turning back is. And when he hears the way that people react, he realizes, oh my God, they think I'm going to do more. The world thinks I'm a monster, and maybe I am. That's just an amazing moment. It's one of my favorite moments in wrestling.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned like the golden age of TV and how you get these like such layered characters and relationships, and you know there's so many different things you can read into their motives, and to the point where you know they do something, you know, like one small thing and it has so much meaning applied to it, and you can debate it to the end. And that is one thing that I think Hangman has, you know, not to make this podcast that's about Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard about Hangman Page, but why not? It's something that I think Hangman has done better than any other person in wrestling is bring that level of sophistication to his character, where you've got this. Because you know what? I don't know. I thought both things in the moment. I thought there was part of me thought that has Hangman realize what he is and he's a monster now, and he's, you know, then going off to see what happens, you know, to sort of hide from himself almost, or was he going truly thinking he might go back there and have him another piece of Swerve, and he just thought, nah, it's not even worth my time anymore.
Yeah,
I don't know. It could be either. And both are legitimate readings into it. And I think to strengthen your case is, you know, there is like, no one else does this, and I don't even know how to describe it other than that his eyes can soften sometimes. And he, you know, he had such a hard stare in those moments. And it's the same thing that happens when, you know, he does this thing to Christopher Daniels, which happens in January. He retired. He beats Christopher Daniels so hard in a Texas death match. He wins the Texas death match, and then he turns around. This time he does go back to the ring and he does an angel's wings on Christopher Daniels and storms out. And then a week later, it's revealed to him that Christopher Daniels, like, he had to retire after that because of what happened, because he was like, because of the medical issues that he's had as a result of Hangman doing this to him. And you see his eyes soften again because, like, he's had that realization again of what a monster he is. And it's not until Christopher Daniels sort of talks to him that he's able to reconcile that with himself, I guess. And I feel like that supports your reading of things, Sergi, where he hears how the crowd reacts to him and thinks, what have I become?
Yeah, exactly. It's so much fun. Like you said, in many ways, that match and that night are not fun, but it's evocative, and it really gets you going. Like, oh wow, where's this going, and you know what's going to happen with this character. I honestly have to admit, I did not expect him to have a redemption arc so quickly afterwards, but the thing with Christopher Daniels made it work in a way that I couldn't have anticipated.
Yep. It is very, you know, that moment, as I said, like it's not dissimilar to that Tully Blanchard Magnum TA moment, where Magnum TA, after winning the match, he looks at him and he's still got that stake in his hand, and he's like, maybe I could do this again. And ultimately, he just throws him to the side. And as Magnum said, like, I let him live. It was not forgiveness or redemption. It was mercy. You know, it's just Magnum in that moment just going, no, I'm the better man. I'm going to be the better man, which is different to what Hangman went with. But it's interesting. In both cases, you've got that moment where it's like you see the look in their eyes. You see that there's like mixed feelings going on there, and you can see the wheels turning, and then they choose not to go back for more for various reasons. But, you know, that's just another parallel between these two matches.
Definitely. And I think that when you have that kind of moment where, as a member of the audience, you can see someone's wheels turning, whether that someone is a pro wrestler or an actor in a movie or TV show, those are some of the most powerful moments in that kind of entertainment with a live actor or with someone putting on a performance like that. Is not what they do or say, but when you can take a moment and see them making a decision. They're not doing or saying anything. It's just they're changing right in front of them.
And that's like the most dramatic moments, the most heavy moments sometimes. Yeah. There's nothing is even being said. And, you know, both of these matches, what triumphs that they could get to the point where, you know, you can see that in what is ultimately wrestling is like, you know, it's many things, but it's one of the things that it is a form of theater. And that's what you are seeing in those moments. Sergi, I've loved talking about this match. I loved going back and rewatching it. It's something I've seen before, but digging into the promos beforehand, thinking about the tone, and then also I could talk about Hangman and Swerve till the cows come home, to be frank. But we do need to draw a line under this at some point. Is there anything that you'd like to say? And if not, let the good people know where they can find you and where they can read your work.
Okay. Thank you for having me. It was great to talk, like you said, about Tully and Magnum, and rewatch that match, and like you, for the first time, watch some of the build up to it, and make those parallels. The Hangman Swerve feud, one of my favorites, and I think that they took a lot of inspiration from that match, not so much from the build, but from the match itself, and you see that especially in that lights out cage match. And it's been great talking about it. If you want to occasionally see some of the things that I have to say about wrestling, I recommend checking out ProWrestlingMusings.com. And I hope that if we can time things right, I will have the next section of a big kind of a book, basically, on the Hangman Swerve feud coming out around the same time as this podcast.
You've already got a number of articles up on Pro Wrestling Musings about that, about Hangman's rise, fall, redemption, I believe.
Yeah. The name of the series is called Blood Feud, and it covers everything from Swerve first coming out right after All In, and confronting Hangman and saying, "I want your spot," and then where I stopped was at the triple threat match, and then the next section that I'm working on and hoping to release around the same time this podcast comes up will take us through to the match we just spoke about.
Beautiful. And I can also suggest, if you want to dig a bit further back as well, I actually covered the Swerve and Hangman Texas Death Match back in episode 43, back in November 2024. So that's quite a while ago at this point, but I did that with Lyric Swinton. So that's worth checking out as well if Absolutely. You want to dig further back. Thanks again. As well, I'll just shout out Pro Wrestling Musings. Great site. I've written for it a handful of times. Back when you had a podcast, I went on the podcast, and there's also, regular content going out there. Typically there's a Dynamite review or an AEW in week review, which sort of reviews Collision, Dynamite, and the happenings of AEW. I definitely suggest you check out that. And I'll also have links to all of Sergi's social media in the podcast description. But thank you once again, Sergi, for coming. And thanks, guys, for listening in. I hope you enjoyed a trip back, the oldest match that we've covered on this podcast. And hopefully we'll come back to the territories again in the future. But next week, we're hitting fast forward button again. We're going back to the 2010s. We're going to talk Kenny Omega versus Tomohiro Ishii. So that's something to look forward to. I could tell you where it is, but the one way to describe it so you know which match it is, it's the one where Tomohiro Ishii bites the rope. So you've got that to look forward to in 2 weeks' time. It's really fun covering all these sorts of matches, and this was just another great one to jump into. Let me know on the Discord, the Social Suplex Discord, what you thought. If you can think of any more parallels between this and Swerve and Hangman, then let us know. If you just want to talk about the match itself or the build-up or whatever your thoughts are, or, Tony Khan being Jim Crockett, then you can let me know in the Social Suplex Discord. And also, if you have enjoyed it, we'd love it if you could rate and review the podcast. You can do that on your podcast app of choice, Spotify, Apple Podcast, whatever you use. And we've got the Social Suplex feed, of course, which has all of the shows for Social Suplex, and then also the standalone AEW Match Guide feed. And you can also support us through Red Circle, and there's links for all of that in the bio. But thanks again, Sergi. Appreciate you jumping on, and thank you to the listeners. Looking forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time. Kenny Omega versus Tomohiro Ishii. Let's go, and I will see you then. Bye. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.